Welcome to the 11th hour. I am so excited to have my dear friend Joshua Brown here today. And the theme of this story is called The Sacred Spine. I met Joshua at a beloved land project community hub space in Tucson, Arizona. And it's a beautiful place to meet new folks. And I went to one of the potlucks, which happen every Sunday. And lo and behold, there was at the end of the table, sitting to my right, someone who I could see was an observer of the space. And I really like to usually tune in with the irises of every single person. So I saw Joshua, and he's hard to miss because he is in a chair. And so I was like, yay, another glitch in the matrix. It's my favorite, to just meet people that uh, not only have marginalized voices, that's definitely something that I like to highlight, but also that just roll through life differently. So Joshua is here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a special thing to recollect on, and I would love to hear sort of your take on meeting the Airy Fairy 11 and just how our role has been together. And then we can get into a little bit more of your story too.
Um, Memory tends to run together for me, so forgive me if I don't fully put everything together in a ornate fashion.
Yeah, it's all here. All of it is welcome. Any sort of memory, inkling. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what I remember most, first of all, is just the magnetism.
Hmm.
I was very drawn to whatever you were carrying and bringing in at that moment. And I was fascinated by the conversation, and there were so many. Um, mm, what do you have those aha moments during the
Mhm.
course of our conversation? I remember that much. I don't remember a lot of the details of the conversation, but I do remember how it felt so synchronistic
Mhm.
and powerful. Yes, it felt like a catalyst. It felt like something for forward motion at the time. Yeah, it was interesting.
Wow. Yeah, I was coming off of a month-long pilgrimage to Peru and do really deep integration. So meeting you also was a pivotal moment in my integration because I was experiencing a lot of depth in my own contemplation. So to meet someone who equally carries the gnosis, that we love that word, of just the most magnificent self-inquiry. I remember though there was this curiosity because I don't remember who I was talking to, but I remember you asking me a question and then you asked me to come sit closer because I was sitting a couple seats away. And then you're like, yeah, come sit closer. And then we did a really deep drop in. And I remember the theme from my recollection was desire. And that was a cool thing to start unpacking because I was like,
Oh,
oh,
yes.
yes, he met somebody that is going to give him a lot of permission. And I remember there was a little bit of hesitance in my recollection.
And
Not hesitance from you to talk about it, but there was, in my perception, that there was a hesitance to access desire from your end. And I was like, ooh, this is a really great landscape to unpack. And we started talking about really high level concepts around desire.
we spoke about challenges with desire and our perspective of desire. And I
Mhm.
asked you a particular question about it. I don't recall how the question went, but you were explaining um, your relationship with desire at the time.
Mhm. The choreography of the balance, as I remember correctly, it was like this because I continue to contemplate this. That was nearly a year ago. And I still sit with that. And so I was asking you, I was like, ooh, how do you process this as one that in my, now I know you a lot more from then, but I remember asking, how do you balance that? Because that feeling of not going too far to become like fully hedonistic and just kind of a consumer and one that just extracts from this human experience. Yet, what else are we here to do? In the sense of, yes, sacred stewardship of storytelling and honoring our planet and our own temples, but then also, how do we not get so lost in the keeping ourselves small or just not want, you know what I mean? That's, I think, what the main topic of conversation was. And it was enlightening for me to talk to you, especially with your story. So I think that perfectly kind of invites us into sharing more about who you are and why I was so equally magnetized to your story.
Before I get to that, I did want to just make one comment about the desire, and you mentioned hedonism and such. Um, I've been continuously drawn back to the concept of middle path, similar to what Buddhism talks about. And we get to explore the wildly swinging spectrum of what our desires uh, bring up in us. We often will swing one direction and get way off into to our explorations, whatever we allow ourselves, however far we go, breaking through limitations or limiting beliefs or something else. And then we realize too that when we get into excess, it pulls us into maybe forms of addiction or mental aberration or other things that we can struggle with, and it throws us off balance as a human, and we don't feel aligned with our truest being
Mm,
because we are lost in excess or distraction. And so we might go the other direction where we're so strictly disciplined, so dogmatic that we also suffocate our being and suppress our natural stuff. In the middle is where I find myself allowing things to be as they are,
mm,
and I can feel whatever energies move through my being as if I'm the earth herself, like an ocean that does
mm,
its thing, like the wind that does its thing, the sunshine does its thing. In the midst of that hurricane or whatever else you're in, your consciousness is just observing this, and you have a choice to indulge or not to indulge and to stay balanced, because in your interpersonal relationships, you are choosing the higher good for everyone, not just your
mhm,
own being. Um, and so I find a beauty in the balance of it
mhm.
and functionality. So, yeah.
Yes. So eloquently and well said. The middle path. It's the way.
Yeah.
And a lot
Hmm.
of people are scared of that. And that's where we began our first conversations and contemplations together, was so much fear. Again, and you, I would love to hear some stuff about your early days because that's really what shaped a lot of your narrative and your own contemplations, which I related to a lot.
Oh, let's see. How far back should I go?
The genesis, whatever you desire that comes up that feels like relevant and just, yeah, that you desire to share. We would love to know more.
I have a personal belief that we choose to come here for specific reasons, and we choose our families, and we choose the dynamics we grow up with, and then we choose how much responsibility to take for that process as we move along. And I think for myself, going along, I have embraced more and more um, responsibility for my wholeness of being here and
Mm,
however it's expressing. Um, I grew up in a family in Michigan, in the state of Michigan. Um, I grew up in a family of 14 children. I'm the third of nine boys, five girls. I grew up in a very religious family. I grew up in you could call it evangelical or something along those lines. Um, my early experiences that really stand out for me that I find most profound are my connections with nature and my connections with my perception of God as I knew God then.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I grew up close to nature. My dad loves nature and instilled that in me. And my mother instilled she had a certain kind of nurture that is always with me. So I love my
Mhm.
mom. And hmm, I
In
mean,
what ways,
that's
when you say your dad loved nature out of curiosity, what did that look like in your formative year? Like, in what ways was that implemented or integrated or invited for your family?
my dad's relationship with nature. It's a controversial aspect for some, definitely. Uh, my my dad's relationship with nature was born out of his childhood need to escape from abuse.
Mm,
So my dad grew up spending hours in the woods and raising foxes and owls, among other things. Um, he
mm,
he had a cognitive disability, a mild one. He had a traumatic brain injury as a baby, and so he had a learning disability and dyslexia, and so he was treated badly in school in those days
mm,
in the 50s. And so his escape was nature and his understanding of God.
mhm,
And he merged those two into his own heart. And that heart was passed to me.
mhm,
Um, and that's not addressing religion, dogma. That's a whole nother can of worms.
mhm,
But the heart of it, the beauty of it, I appreciate my father to this day for
mhm,
bringing in something very genuine from his own inner being that he experienced through nature. And so growing up, yes, my father was involved in uh, the fur trade. My father was involved in taking us out on what we call the trap line. Not everyone's familiar with such a thing. Without getting into ethics or other things like that, it did bring me a very visceral, very in-depth experience with Mother Earth in a particular
mhm,
manner. And I got to experience firsthand what it felt like to observe death and to observe life and
mhm,
to experience the impact of both of those things.
mhm,
And out of that grew this fire, this love, this respect for Mother Earth as mother,
mhm,
and yes, there's human tradition. Yes, there's certain kinds of conditioning involved in that when it comes to the human side of things. But nature is purely speaking to you all the time.
mhm,
So in that relationship that I developed, it was a very personal, direct one. And to me, God or Goddess was speaking to me in a variety of ways, and that was one, simply touching Earth and being with her in relationship.
mhm. Beautiful. So from, let's see, I love to think of life timelines as brackets, but essentially you were fully able-bodied out on the land on these, did you call them trap lines,
Mhm.
following this flow with your father and I would imagine a whole gang of your siblings
Yes,
and one of the oldest siblings, sounds like,
I am the third.
yeah, of a whole tribe of children.
Yes.
And wow, yeah, I'm just starting to like formulate. I love getting inside people's universes. And I've heard some of your story, of course, through our work together, but to really take up space to share more is really lovely. So thank you for taking us on this journey. So what was the age that everything shifted, and take us down that sort of experience for you?
At 9 years old, um, within the context of the religion that I was
Mm,
raised with, I just developed this upwelling, this desire that started in the center of my chest to know God as I understood God, but to
mm,
know God in a more personal way.
mhm.
So I would kneel down and pray every day. I would get down on my knees as a 9 year old and I would pray and I would ask for what did I ask for? My desire was presence, was just really
Mm,
connecting in with God, feeling God
mhm,
as I understood God. And I would fill up with this bliss. I would just fill up with a bliss and I would walk around in that bliss. And I'd have plenty of ups and downs as a 9 year old would, emotionally and so on and so forth, and a lot of concepts that I was challenged with.
mm,
But by the time I hit 11 years old, I was I was like this walking light bulb in a way
mhm. I love
because
that.
it's like moths drawn to a flame,
Mhm,
or a bulb. I had this magnetism. I would walk around our church. I grew up in an all African American church. Um, we were the only white family for 13 years straight. And I grew up in a mostly African American community. And it was beautiful and special in many ways. It was a catalyst for a lot of what I experience now.
mm,
Um, my my experience at that time was like that song "I'm Walking on Sunshine,"
mhm,
and life around me was always glowing, and this presence would glow in my chest, and people were just drawn to me, and they would ask questions, and they would listen to me, and I lost all apprehension, fear, anxiety. I was in this very grounded place. Um, Part of that was this constant, ongoing conversation in my brain with the divine. It was
mhm,
just this constant conversation. And I would walk up in front of the church and sing a solo with no anxiety whatsoever, no nervousness. And I'd never done that before. And this
mm,
our beautiful music choir director, Sister Maggie Willis, she used to train me. She had voice lessons.
mhm,
And I would sing these songs of surrender,
mm,
songs about surrender, these songs about offering myself up for a greater service or a greater purpose.
mhm,
And it had a certain kind of fulfillment to it, a beauty
mhm,
to it, because I felt this at one mint, so to speak. I felt this like I was home with a beloved, right? And there was a point where I hit a wall, though, where I hit a dark night of the soul experience
mhm,
and didn't fully make sense to me at the time. It began to over time. And by the time I hit 13, going through puberty and all that, there was a day when that presence and that bliss and that joy dropped away completely.
mhm,
And I was beside myself with confusion and fear. Like, where did this bliss go? What happened? Did I do something wrong? And within my 13-year-old mind, I felt like I must have done something horrible to not deserve this presence anymore.
Mm,
So I began crying for it. And I spent hours crying out for it.
mm,
And there was a moment where it got so dark that I felt completely abandoned
mhm,
and I felt like I was physically going to die and I couldn't do anything but cry and sit in my mom's lap
mm,
and fall asleep. And at that point, I went through this whole abandonment process. I didn't become angry at God. I became sad at God
mhm,
as I knew God. And I remember someone in the church saying to me, and I didn't fully resonate with this, it didn't fully make sense at the time. Sometimes God withdraws himself to see if you're still interested or if you're still.
mhm,
I went through a process with that.
mm,
And through my later teen years, I kind of left a lot of the Christian seeking process behind. And
mm,
throughout my 20s, I went into an exploration of spirituality and different traditions, especially Native American traditions. I spent a lot of time with the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwa in northern Wisconsin and Michigan. And I participated in sweat lodges. I learned how to play Native American flute. I just, it was Mother Earth that saved me from that dark night of the soul experience. When I felt abandoned by that which I understood God to be, I went and I went to Mother and she embraced me in a way that I couldn't have been nurtured otherwise. And I, in my 15, 16-year-old years, spent many, many hours out in forests and fields connecting with animals and learning how to track, learning how to connect with everything that was around me and learning herbs and edible fruits and flowers and everything else and just really immersing myself in that. And that kept me sane. That kept me
mhm,
sane after that sense of abandonment by
mhm,
and over time I began to have a more integrated experience where I realized, oh, wait a minute, God is as much in the emptiness as he is in the fullness. God is as much a she as God is a he. God is as much neutral as either.
mhm,
God is in all things, as all things. God is in the sadness, God is in the fear, God is in the emptiness, God is in the abandonment.
mhm,
That saying, there's a biblical saying, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And it's true when you can't feel, when you feel cold, when you feel numb, when you feel empty, when you feel hopeless, that's also God there with you.
mhm.
And there's that old poem about the footprints in the sand. People know that one. And it's like when you think that you're completely adrift, you're being carried.
Mhm.
And ultimately, in some perspectives, would say you're carrying yourself.
Uh,
Yeah.
Very psychedelic.
Yeah. Uh, so from there, into my 20s, I went exploring. I traveled around the United States. I wanted to go to other countries. It just didn't come to that point. I spent time in Montana, Idaho, Colorado a little, uh, Arizona, Texas. I spent a lot of time in Texas and Wisconsin. Those were my main haunts for a while there. I was a cranberry farmer. I planted trees. I explored a variety of lifestyles, but it was relatively nomadic. I was a bit of an aberration in terms of normal society because I never rented, with the exception of just like offering someone maybe $50 to a month to use their facilities while camping on their property.
Mhm.
You know, when I worked on the cranberry farm, I lived in a tent in the summer,
Very cool.
and I lived in and worked at outdoor living skills schools. I almost got a job working for this youth uh, rehabilitation program
Mm,
here in Arizona once. I never did get to that point. But through all of that, I was at this point leading up to uh, the car accident in 2010. I was planting trees in Alabama, and I kept having this emptiness come back to me of feeling like I'm on all these different trips and tangents, but I'm not on the exact path that I should be on right now. And I almost felt like this deep heart calling.
mm,
And at that point, that I had begun to recognize that God never left.
mm,
And and I know I'm using the term God for anyone who struggles with that term. I think of it in a quite universal sense. Um,
mm,
I I needed to, after my travels, I needed to settle down for a while and get into myself.
mm,
So in the spring of 2010, I went to a friend's place in a national forest in Michigan. And I spent time cleansing my body with herbs, juices, and getting clearer inside. What I didn't, what I was, what I'm looking back at right now is that I didn't fully understand the depth that I needed to go to, and I didn't seem fully prepared for the shadow work that would come out of it.
mm.
But I had a strong desire, a fire in me for something to shift. I wasn't satisfied. So I remember asking a question one day, and the question that I asked was to the universe, I want to do something that I've never done before that I'm not comfortable with. That was my request.
Mm,
I spoke that to a friend of mine. I repeated it to a friend of mine who's still a friend to this day. And for 2 weeks, I was helping a friend with a project at Ferris State University. And during that space of time, I noticed after this cleanse, I had a lot of anxiety and shadow stuff coming up in my physical body, and I wasn't fully dealing with it. A little note to make. All the way back when I was probably 6, 7 years old, I was deathly afraid to step on the handicap symbol in parking lots. And I thought that if I stepped on it, I would break my back and I would be paralyzed.
Whoa, I never heard that story yet. Whoa, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
So fast forwarding to about 24 years old, I I had this constant fear rising up in me, these intrusive thoughts that I was going to get in a car accident, and this fear of it. I was driving a 87 Toyota mini pickup at the time. It had rusted cab corners. It had been previously used for mudding, so someone had welded the frame back together. So I'm driving this old clunker,
Mhm,
and the engine was perfect, but the body was not so nice, and the brakes weren't doing great at the time. I'm driving north one day, and I'm driving towards the Mackinac Bridge, and I had this strong, strong intuition, this strong feeling, and this voice was saying, "Go back to your friend's place in the woods and stay there for one more night."
mm,
But I was running away from an intense situation that I'd had with someone, and it had brought up the avoidant in me. It had brought up some dark pain that I had not processed from childhood. And I was running away to a source of comfort. I was thinking of my brother Samuel, and he was on the cranberry farm in Wisconsin. I'm like, I got to go see Sam. I'm going to drive over there and see Sam. So I'm driving about 400 miles, and I'm driving north, and this feeling says, don't go on that highway. Turn left to go back to the woods. I'm like, no, I want to go see my brother Sam, right? I get up to this town called Petoskey, where my second oldest brother was born. And my brakes start acting up. So I stop in a parking lot and I'm looking at my brakes. I'm like, I'll just try. I go across the Mackinac Bridge. I get over into Wisconsin near a town. Um, I'm forgetting the name of the town right now, but it's northern Wisconsin in the Shwamagon National Forest. And it was 2 in the afternoon. And at that moment, I felt like I'd entered a dream, like my head was literally in this fog,
Mm.
like I'd crossed dimensional space or something. And my driver's side window is down. I'm going 55. It's a warm day, middle of May. And a grasshopper flies through the window and hits me in the ear really hard, like a rubber band. So I'm a little disoriented for a second. My hair is very long. My hair is as long as yours.
Mm.
And I looked over and I realized that I had spilled an entire jar of honey on the truck seat. Somehow it had popped open and spilled a jar of honey. And then I hear this buzzing noise. And I realize there's a bumblebee sitting on top of my head that had also come through the window. And I'm reaching up and I'm brushing this bee off of my head and I'm looking down. I had a history with being afraid of bees, so I was slightly panicky and I was trying to brush this bee off the seat. And I look up and I realize, oh no, I'm going off the road. I'm kind of wandering off the side of the road. So I turned my wheel too hard and I flipped my truck. And I flipped 4 or 5 revolutions across the highway, like being in a washing machine. I saw a culvert go by. If you don't know what that is, it's a drainage tube under a road, and what other people call them. And at some point in that roll, the truck cab crushed on my head and broke my neck. I didn't realize my neck was broken when it came to a stop. I was hanging upside down. I was looking out through a crack. Later, I had heard from one of the paramedics that I was folded in half, that my feet were up by my ears, forward, thank goodness, not backwards. And my whole body was buzzing. And in that moment, I realized I could not move. I couldn't move much more than uh, just barely move my arms.
Mm.
And I had broken my neck at the fifth and sixth vertebrae. I had crushed my spinal cord. I had shattered C4, which is the fourth one down from the top. I had fractured the second cervical vertebrae. I didn't know any of this, of course. And I had crushed my spinal cord. I had about 80% damage to the spinal cord, according to the doctor
Mm.
later. And I don't know how I was awake. I was looking out through this crack and I realized I couldn't move. So I hollered, help me. And, the first thing I said was, God help me. And then I said, help. I was hollering for help.
Mm.
This man pulls over and walks down into the ditch. He says, are you all right? I said, yeah. Can you pull me out? He says, hang on. I called the paramedics. They'll be here in 20 minutes. He said, is there anything you want me to pull out of there before they get here? I said, no. And so I instinctively, intuitively just started speaking with him.
Mm.
And I don't remember what I said. I just talked for 20 minutes. It kept me awake. When the paramedics got there, they had to cut the cab open and roll me onto a stretcher carefully. And the
Out of
saw,
curiosity. Yeah, so they had to like that's what I was curious. I don't know a lot about this. So they had to saw the car open.
Yeah, they had that thing
Right.
called the jaws of life. Um, and in your bio of this talk, there's one photo of the truck after it was smashed up.
Yeah.
I've got more if people want to see them. But so I realized I couldn't move. I didn't know if I was going to get my function back. I didn't know anything about what was happening. I was, yeah, they cut the cab open with that thing called the jaws of life and rolled me onto a stretcher and they asked me about an emergency number. I gave them my brother Samuel's number and they put me in the ambulance and I told them, take me to Marquette. It was the closest city nearby with a trauma 2 center. I didn't know it was a trauma 2 center, but
Hmm.
they drove me to a small hospital I had heard later in an ambulance, and they didn't have the facilities I needed. So they drove me 100 miles north to Marquette, where a lot of my friends were on the south shore of Lake Superior in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And I woke up briefly before going into the emergency room, and they said, we're here. And then that was it. I was out for about 3 days. When I woke up, they had done surgery on my neck. They had taken bone from my hip and fused two vertebrae. They had to reconstruct C4. My spine had been subluxed, meaning that it had popped off to one side and stretched the spinal cord. So they had to try to put it back together, and they weren't able to get it perfectly straight. Um, and they put in titanium rods and screws called Harrington rods to hold my neck in place. And then I had a brace. I was on a respirator. I didn't have enough lung function to breathe on my own. I had to breathe with the
Hmm.
machine. I didn't have no lung strength. Um, my my I had a ruptured artery in my neck. I had a ruptured carotid artery. It had split. The inner layers had split from the outer layers, so they had to put a stent in my vena cava to keep my me from getting clots in the brain. Um, and So I couldn't eat or drink because there was a tube going out down into my lungs. They fed me through what's called an NG tube, where they have you swallow a tube up your nose down into your stomach.
Mm.
I pulled that out once, so they had to tie my hands, and I have this vague memory of signaling my brother Sam to untie me so I could pull it out again. And I don't know
That's
how I
all.
pulled I don't know how I pulled it out because I couldn't open my fingers or like use my hands. So I don't remember how I pulled it out. But in the ICU, um, my family was notified, and my father and my brother drove from Montana, my brother Eric and my dad. My mom wasn't able to make it. She didn't know about the accident until later because she was going through a pretty harsh time with the death of someone close. And she was off in Alabama. And my oldest brother flew in from Oregon. A friend of mine came up from Texas, and that was my friend Nathan. And the girl that I had been running away from and had gotten into an argument with, who gave me the jar of honey that was in my truck, came up to visit. Um, Woman, pardon me, forgive me.
Mhm.
My beautiful friend Anna Branner, who has been a catalyst for so much in my life, she brought me a pillow that her mother had made for me.
Mm.
When she heard the story, she said, "Oh no," because the pillow was covered in honeybees.
Oh my
So
God.
there's a symbolism here with the bee species, and my relationship with them has evolved over time. I consider that species my best friend at this point in time. They were a catalyst for many things, and they always have been, and they bring me messages consistently. Um, But at that point, I was in this ICU for 3 weeks and choosing a rehab hospital to go to. I probably had more than 100 visitors over that time, beautiful people coming in to sing me songs, to do energy work, to give me crystals, to bring me vegetable juice. You know, I wasn't supposed to have vegetable juice. And the nurses looked the other way a lot. They were very kind. I had wonderful nurses. And I remember an Italian medic crew came in to fly me in a Learjet, my first time ever flying, on a stretcher out to Colorado, to Denver, Colorado, to a place called Craig Hospital, which fortunately my insurance was paying for at the time. Michigan had decent insurance. Uh, I remember as I was being rolled out, the entire the entire ICU unit was standing in lines, clapping and cheering.
Wow.
And that was fun. And the crew that flew with me out to Colorado and my friend Nathan, who flew with us, they said, just remember us when you're in New Mobility magazine someday. And
Hey, that's a good spell casted to reintegrate into the story arc.
it is currently 11:11 here. So I spent 3 months in a rehab hospital in Inglewood, and that was a special time. That was a very formative time. It was like returning to a womb of sorts, and I was very
Mhm.
fortunate to be surrounded by a host of beautiful people, from my doctor to my care aides, to my nurses, to my physical therapist, my occupational therapist. They had a whole program that was very well built,
Mm,
and um, it it set me up good for what was to come for the next 15 years. Um, I'm going to pause for a moment to check in with you.
wow. Yeah, we're here.
Okay. I need to take a sip of tea, excuse me.
Hmm.
So, I had a friend in Michigan who called me one day and he said, I would like to modify my apartment for you to live in. I have a
Mm,
house in town in Marquette, Michigan. Would you like to live there? I said, yeah, if my insurance company will pay for it. And so I had a representative at the time. It was like this middle person, a case manager. And she said, wow, I've never heard of this happening before, but I guess it's on the premise that you were quote unquote homeless before your accident. So they paid to modify my friend's downstairs apartment for wheelchair users. They put in a ramp, they put in an accessible bathroom, accessible shower, accessible kitchen. And I lived there for several years. My older brother took care of me for the first 5 years.
wow.
Yeah. During that space of time, I was in this place of just not wanting to take full responsibility for the nuts and bolts of my support. I gave it all to my brother to do. He's an excellent manager of things, by the way, but it after a while I realized part of that process was my need to take responsibility for my needs
Mm,
in a greater way.
hmm.
And my consciousness, I would say, was in some respects a little dense when it came to self-awareness at the time.
Hmm.
And I was thrown into this huge growth curve because it was like dying and being born again
Hmm.
in a very physical, real way. You're
Totally.
thrown from one life into a completely unfamiliar life. So I began to navigate the life of a quadriplegic, the life of transfers, the life of being limited, the life of having to face the mirror of limiting beliefs and frustrations and sadness and griefs of loss and shifting changes, and also all of the health problems that came with that process. A lot of health problems come with a spinal cord injury, especially if you don't know how your whole body's changing. Your whole nervous system is changing. Your body's still in shock. It takes a while for it
Wow.
to come to some place of normalcy. And during that process, you develop a variety of health issues because you have what they call neurogenic bowel and bladder, which means you don't
Mm,
have bowel and bladder control. You have, for me, with this level of injury, it's paralysis from the sternum down. I have some muscle, what they call muscle sparing, below
mhm.
that in the back between the shoulder blades, which is very
Wow.
fortunate
That is.
because I can lift my arms in the air, which is something that some people can't do.
That is different than some of my friends that I've seen in the past. I
Mm,
actually, yeah, that's interesting.
mm. Yeah, and I have some wrist function, partial wrist function, can't open my fingers, but that enabled me, and I also had a little bit of an independent minded function at the time, not as independent as I am now, but I wanted to push a manual wheelchair instead of using a power chair because I wanted to feel a little bit more functional and
Sure.
motion. I had a power chair, but uh, so I had a variety. That whole place was like a womb for me. I had a variety of healing supports, so many different therapies, acupuncture and Thai massage and cranial sacral and Reiki and uh, something called La Ho Chi, which not very many people are familiar with, and reflexology and a variety of other experiences, chiropractic, all serving me well in a variety of ways. And I went through many cycles of this meditation and recognizing um, useful things around manifestation and law of attraction and um, what really, when I really got down to the nitty gritty, though, was a process after a couple years of learning to know myself in
Mm,
a much deeper way. And I had to move through a relationship with a partner and leave that behind to really get into the work of self and the
mm,
shadow work. And it was an ongoing process. And um, on alongside that, I went into a healing process. I wanted to explore. One day I asked, this is the second question that was very profound that I asked the universe was, I want to know what true healing looks like. Show me what true healing is. Yeah. And a big portion of that came down to my physical being. So I was introduced to someone named Dr. Robert Morse. He
mhm,
was a naturopathic doctor. And I began exploring a whole new lifestyle. I went down this rabbit hole of studying herbology and using herbs and fasting and uh, uh, raw foods diet and fruit diet and think different things to help to eliminate or um, relieve so many of the painful symptoms I was experiencing, whether it was edema or rectal bleeding, pardon that,
mhm,
but uh, um, bladder UTIs, chronic pain. I was in chronic pain in the beginning.
mm,
I I had extreme low blood pressure. I had a variety of challenges that were not fun. I suffered a lot physically.
mhm,
Didn't want to talk to anyone. I was in too much pain. So
mm.
I spent maybe those first 2 years um, coping with cannabis, beer, and Papa Murphy's pizza. And sleep, lots of sleep. But I got tired of the exhaustion and I felt stagnant. So there
Mhm.
was one day when I asked that question, I want to know what true healing is. And I had already had some previous knowledge because of that cleanse I'd mentioned that I'd done in the national forest before the accident happened. And that was that time that I'd asked that question. I want to do something I've never done before that I'm not comfortable with. So that was a catalyst. So I went back to that knowledge and I picked up from where I left off and I began to explore more knowledge and learning how the endocrine system works and
Mm,
learning how the lymphatic system works and learning how the body does this balancing process with alkaline and acid elements and just
mhm,
diving into the biochemistry of life and the rules and laws of nature. And when I started to recognize and follow some of these laws, my suffering started to lighten when it came to the physical load. And during the process of that physical suffering lightening, the spiritual stuff, the dark night of the soul stuff, the shadow work stuff, all naturally arose as I went along.
mm, mm,
And a big part of my early years was an exploration of the self. Who am I? That was the question, who am I? And in that process of who am I was the elimination or the falling away of all that was false. And that process itself has been years long, years long. It's
mm,
still ongoing.
mm.
It's don't limit yourself. Don't feel like you're failing because you don't get it right now, or you're not enlightened according to whatever idea your mind has when it comes to ideas of enlightenment. And we're all at different stages with our understanding of that kind of thing. But the relationship with the self is a recognition of the core of your being, experiencing the rest. I have a friend who calls it an irreducible quanta of consciousness. So I had a curiosity to explore that. Not everyone has that curiosity, and I think that's perfectly okay. I there's no right or wrong in that regard.
Mhm.
Every soul, in my experience so far, eventually comes to that when they're ready,
Great.
and you don't have to pressure yourself. Don't push yourself to be beyond whatever you're called to be right now.
Sure.
And so I had to also surrender, and I have to do this consistently, surrender the inner perfectionist. I surrender the inner I'm not good enough, the inner child that says I need to do this and this and this to be worthy. I
Sure.
need, and that work continued. I ended up eventually going through some very cathartic experiences with my family and going separate ways with my brother. And that was a teaching moment, many teaching moments. I had a friend who was a big catalyst for that shift, and she has always been. Uh, I've been fortunate as I go along. It's like mile markers where I meet these characters, and they always are like this kind of muse or catalyst or kickoff for me, right? They put fire under me. And she was one of those. And that relationship taught me a lot.
Mhm.
And um, I got to the point where I had taken enough responsibility for my life and my experience and had started to manage it and pull back into my being. And it was important for me as a male, as a soul, as a person, to have some of that measure of responsibility. And it gave me and it empowered me. And I ended up moving to Gainesville, Florida. And I lived in Florida for 7 years before passing on to Arizona. And during that space of time in Florida, in astrology, I was living on my Pluto line or close to the Pluto line. And if anyone knows what astral relocation is, it has to do with the planetary influence in relation to your birth chart of what it's going to be like living in that particular place. So it's close to Saturn and Pluto. Pluto is the depths, the dark night of the soul, the all the shadow stuff, and Saturn is cold hard reality and dealing with what's present in front of you and taking responsibility, that kind of thing. So I went through this process of immense growth
Mm,
in my ability to communicate, especially with others. I went through some abuse. I went through um, a very intense relationship. I went through 7 years worth.
Mhm.
And that was, I would say that I am very grateful to that relationship at this point
Mhm.
because it broke open so much and it helped more falsehoods fall away and the limiting beliefs and the facades and the masks of who I thought I was
Sure.
and the bypassing aspect, which is a big part of was a big part of my experience where I had a very profound connection with the divine, and yet there was a lot of bypassing happening or
Mhm.
pretending not to know.
Mhm.
I learned about trauma. I learned about attachments theory. I learned about nonviolent communication. I learned about what we call reflective or active listening. And this led me into this coaching aspect and this desire to support others in that way.
Mhm.
And while I've not made an actual practice out of it, the practice comes to me. And yeah, after moving to Arizona, and I feel like I've moved through so much of the dark stuff into a more functional, empowered place. It's still ongoing, but it's just so different.
Sure.
Yeah. And I didn't want to get too far off track for the trajectory we were taking, but
No, it's wonderful. You're taking us on a journey, and it's wonderful to hear. I think there's so much that could continue to be shared. And this is, as we know, as we've talked about BTS behind the scenes, there's I've been getting a lot of information because you know me. I sometimes I put the hat on just to cap it, but I'm
mm,
seeing a vision for this continuing for you. This is stuff that we talk about within the Metamorpho of this is because the last sentence that you said that I heard was that you haven't made that a practice yet. But what we've
correct.
been kind of uncovering is your the wisdom that you carry is so great, and you do work obviously in the community and support others through their journey, whether that's spinal cord injury or whether that's elders that are, you said that have gone through strokes. And so you are active. And I know that there's other people that could come to you that don't have that sort of. So that's more of a act, as you said, active and passive listening. So I believe that I've always seen for what we've been uncovering for your journey is podcasting
Hmm.
and storytelling and being able to walk with others through sharing more.
Yes.
And we can continue to do segments as well because I think that I've always wanted to highlight your voice. When we've been at Harmony, I've been just seeing you be able to do lectures. And it's so special because of how you integrate. So I would love to bring this to a space of you did such, I loved it. This was so wonderful. And I would love to, at the last tail end of this, whatever feels most resonant for you to continue to channel is for those out there that are learning. We're in a world starving for sacred. You and I talk a lot about that. We all do
Mhm.
at this point. And in a world that is so afraid to take up space and we're in bite size, this is what I loved about this is that it's the antithesis, which is your whole metaphor of learning to integrate and find the self beyond the self. Wow. I mean, there's nothing like a complete death and rebirth, a complete metamorphosis, um, almost in a reverse aspect, right? Because it's so cool. I've already seen so much that again I'll have to share with you, but there's been so much that's come through even around When I started working with you, Joshua, I remember saying to you, and I don't know if you recall this, I said, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. I see this whole thing for you. Joshua, you're literally just going to soar past me. So the irony is the stillness. And one thing that I love about our sessions is it does cause me to pull back because we are in a world of like fast moving and so much noise. And I appreciate your presence so much and the pulse that you send in our community as well, for presencing and for stillness. And so, this sacred spine, the sacred spinal invitation for you is to take up space and to stretch out. So, I look forward to more of that. And I would just be curious in your synthesis or whatever you desire to share is your encouragement and invitation for others seeking more stillness with spinal cord injuries, without. All of us are starving for that same sort of stillness and that same sort of inquisitive process with source.
My personal experience with stillness, when you uncover who you are, there are many processes people take. One I've gone down, a road I've gone down is a process of negation, recognizing what I'm not.
Mm,
And stillness is something that, for me, that I feel.
mhm,
Stillness isn't moved by thought or emotion. It's just there.
mm,
Thought and emotion, for me, fly around it. Like the stillness is in the middle of the tornado. The stillness is in the middle of the hurricane. All the stuff around it is not the stillness itself, you know. Um, Sometimes it's just the simplest recognition of what you are. And I can't necessarily tell you how to get there. It's not really a place to get, it's a place to recognize. And if you have a desire, you'll be led there in the way that you're most resonant with, the way that you know. And a busy mind doesn't negate stillness. A busy emotional complex doesn't negate stillness. It's still there. So someone can say, "Oh, I just can't meditate. I can't relax. I can't get into this. I don't know where my center is. What do they mean? What are they talking about? Find your center, all that kind of stuff, right?"
mhm,
It's recognizing that the stillness is in the middle of the storm, and the storm isn't bad. The
mhm,
storm is just the storm, and it's okay. But when you can anchor to the center, that's when you recognize your own stillness, if that makes any sense. So that's my understanding of stillness. Within that, there's an aspect of regulating the human nervous system. And there are varieties of ways to do this: breathing, various forms of ceremony, touching the earth, especially, really getting out into a quiet place where your human body is synced up with its origins, its physical origins, because its physical origins allow the human body the best chance of connecting to the greater whole, if that makes sense, in my experience.
mhm,
That said, when we are in limiting situations, and I've had many, one is that I'm floating above the ground all the time. I'm not physically grounded.
mhm,
Another is that I'm limited to where I can go in nature, which is why I'm fundraising for this chair.
Mhm.
that will allow that experience to be more integrated. Because my favorite thing to do was sit on Mother Earth back in the day. I just wanted to be close to the ground. Why is that? It's like your mother's womb. It's like your mother's lap. It's even like your father's lap. If you loved your dad, you had a good relationship with your grandmother or your grandpa or your uncle or anyone who gave you that sense of nurturing,
Mhm.
then you can connect into that with Mother Earth herself if you can't find a human to do it. And
Mm.
that leads you into the greater understanding. That's one avenue, leads you into this greater recognition, this greater beingness of who you are, of recognizing who you are. And yeah, so even with my limitations, I was very blessed and very fortunate to have spent so many years being close to Mother Earth in a very relationship type way, where it's an integrated, connected, interdependent um, relational experience.
Mhm.
I wasn't separate. I
Mhm.
didn't feel separate. I felt at home.
Mhm.
So that's my description of that. But
It's so beautiful.
yeah, and yes, a little note. I do serve in the community. I run a spinal cord injury support group at a local rehab hospital in Tucson, and I volunteer in a couple other different capacities with the disability community. And it's a variety from amputees to head injuries to spinal cord injuries. I focus is spinal cord injuries, but because it's a unique injury. But what I find across the board is that my favorite thing is emotional support, emotional and just helping people feel heard and seen and encouraged.
Mhm.
I had a woman not long back who had been shot in the chest, and she was a patient, and um, she was beside herself with fear and tears and crying, and her husband looked very glum. And they had come to a group support group, and I sat with them and I listened to her for a while and held space. And then she says to me, "Oh, I hear that. I want to hear your story now. I hear that you're a Superman." My my OT friends tend to talk me up sometimes, but so I just shared my story, and they got so fascinated. It was the story I told today, and they were asking many questions.
Mm.
And I had been questioning myself when I went there that day, like, why do I do this? I don't know, I just had this attitude for a minute. And after observing, though, how their faces lit up and how they were laughing and so happy after my hour and a half with them, I remembered this is why I do this.
Mm. Mhm.
And so another thing I recognize is when I'm out and about at say like a public farmer's market or something, people will randomly come up to me on occasion. They'll say, "Can I ask you a question?" I'll be, "Of course you can." What? How do you do it? How do you do what you do?
Mm.
And I will say, well, there are a lot of people walking around who are suffering a whole lot more between the ears than I am. They don't have to have a physical disability. We have all kinds of disabilities, seen and unseen. And sometimes we don't acknowledge the unseen disabilities. And we don't acknowledge those inner struggles that people are having that are just as hard as mine, if not harder. And just because I am in a physical state that is limited does not mean that I am suffering.
Mhm.
Uh, I actually roll around in much less pain than a lot of people who are walking, because of the
Mhm.
process I've taken, the healing path I've taken with fruits and herbs and so on. The chronic pain I was in went away. I reduced my medications from maybe 10 down to one. I, you know, and I barely even used that one.
Mhm.
And so my body became as functional as possible with the spinal cord injury. And spinal cord injuries can be redundant. Some people get up walking with 10% of their spinal cord, others don't. I have not fully found the end of the road with the direction I can go. My intention is to walk one day. I've still held that for 15 years, and I'm
Mhm,
still holding that intention.
mhm,
On the way there, I'm just doing the what I'm called to do.
mhm.
And I'm really grateful for all of the support and the beautiful people that show up and just how I'm carried through life. Um, Another aspect of my life is in measuring societal definitions of success. I've not been successful that way.
Mm,
Not yet. And that's coming, and that's an aspect, but it's never been my main focus.
yeah.
And it's like the work of the soul is what I just kept getting pulled into, and it takes priority, it takes precedence.
Mhm,
But now I'm seeing how it can be integrated with the worldly work, et cetera, because it is the work.
mhm.
So yeah, thank you.
So well
Yeah.
done. Yeah. So well said and articulated. It's been such a joy for me to have multiple friends from all different aspects of life, and some that have had disabilities have been some of my favorite friends because I've really appreciated, I just love people in general. I have a whole cast of characters in my world. And so hearing your story is such a treat. Thank you for sharing with all those that are listening, including myself, over this last year of walking, rolling together. And I know that this is just the beginning. One thing that I have a gift within is just being in the Akasha. So do you. We talked about this from the beginning. So I just see so many timelines. And one that I continue to see for you is just, it's so obvious to me that you're a thought leader and one that's going to share your voice and that it's going to be really impactful for this timeline, for the mission, capital M, for those that are seeking this integration that you're talking about. While yours may have been more physical as well, it's for all of us. It's the somatics and the subtleties that you're able to tune into in the field. We've talked about being at Harmony Village and being on the land, and you're so, it was also due to, that's why I wanted you to tell from the genesis of your story growing up in an African American church, and we share that in common of like, my ex-husband was he was the only white worship leader of an all African American church. So we were one of the only, white couples in leadership. And it felt very interesting to have that inversion happen. And I find that you were already set up for such a unique life in general, let alone this experience that kind of shifted and pivoted your entire lifestyle. And it's very, very obvious to me that there's just a lot more that's kind of unraveling. So as we support you in having more mobility, having more the ability to, I would love to see a podcast series of you out in nature. That'd be so cool. I just, for those that are listening, it'll be listed in the post for where to find Joshua. You can also find him on Instagram. Your handle is,
Walk the earth and see.
there it is.
SEA at the end. Walk the earth and see, all one word.
Yes.
No
Merman. Merman.
no symbols. No symbols. It's
Awesome.
just spelled walk the earth and see.
Yeah, walk the earth and see. I saw you in a hit yesterday. I was with a dear friend who, her and her partner do scuba diving. And I was like, wait, so could I bring my friend Joshua down and he could also do these pirate ship excavation? And she was like, of course, my partner works with Alda. And I was like, okay, great. Because Joshua needs to come and swim under the ocean with us because hello. So I was like, okay, great. Scuba diving. So I just see a lot kind of unraveling for this path. And just briefly, I'd like to also make note of a story that I'll unpack at a later time, but one that changed my life, which was in college there in Tucson. I had a dear friend in my art class named Chad Cohn, and he was on the Special Olympics team. He was also quad. and we were in art class together. And that's where it began. He just was sitting next to me, and I was like, cool, this is so fun. So we became kindred friends and still are to this day. And he invited me over to his house, and he lived with a few other quads as well that were on his sports team. And he also had he had a special truck that he could still drive. He was fully, and you are too. You have your own mobile like ability to drive yourself, which is like it's an amazing thing how technology has, because back in the day these things were not possible. And as tech continues to grow, this is all going to get really fun. But Chad was one of my first friends that was quadriplegic, and I would go over to his house and I would get on their laps and we would roll around and do this game in the apartment where we'd like play like with the, I don't know if it was with a ball or what, but it was so fun. So that was one of my first quadriplegic friends. And then later in life was Jesse Belauer, who started Life Rolls On.
Mm.
And you and I had that connection because you knew who Jesse was, because he's a very impactful person within the disabled community and has started one of the most incredible organizations and nonprofits. So I want to make note of that because I've also seen a hit, which we've talked about, Joshua, of us going to the sea together as well and surfing and enjoying the land. So I see visions of some incredible, incredible nature and water. Like the essence of water is so powerful. So I look forward to swimming with you in the ocean, and I'll link a lot of this stuff below, but there's lots to look forward to. So if you would like to help and support Joshua get this new chair, we've already had amazing investors so far. I call them angel investors when anyone invests. Angel investors. So may every single cent be blessed 11,000 fold. We all are the mycelium network, and we all just give nourishment to one another. And that's what I love about these crowdfund campaigns. It's so wonderful. So if that's not able for you to participate in financially, then just sharing this story, whether it's on Substack or on GoFundMe, that really supports Joshua to have his story be told. So thank you, Joshua. This is just, again, just a snippet because there's so much more to who you are. So for those that desire to hear more, those that desire detoxification specialty and just the ability to do one-on-one sort of coaching with Joshua, DM. This is stuff that's, available.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm eternally grateful. Um,
Yes.
yeah, I always like to say my intention is with anything gifted to me, I like to give back in every way that I can, just with so much joy.
Yes. Well, you've given so much to myself. I always say mentee is mentor, let there be no leader amongst us. We're all just learning from one another, and it's been beautiful to do so. So I look forward to even more of that. And yeah, I feel like this feels like a great chapter.
I did want to acknowledge the Metamorpho project
Mm.
has been a beautiful process. How long has it been? 6 months, more than that?
Well, technically, I mean, I got back from Peru in July, so it's been nearly a year.
This is a beautiful program that Levin set up, and um, I was led to it in an interesting way
Mm.
where I had to break down some of my ego defenses and just say, "Hey, I need your help." And it's been a beautiful, cathartic, and growing growth process since. So I'm appreciating that. I'm appreciating her unique blend of offerings.
Yeah, it's so fun. We just do this, really. This is what it is. It's a
Yeah.
lot of this. We just kind of talk and we're like, hey, so I do have the custom curriculum, which includes art therapy. I'm now infusing a new word called psychomagic because it infuses psychotherapy, shamanism, art, and that's really what we're doing within the Metamorpho. So for those that feel called also for one-on-one coaching or coming to my in-person immersive experiences, then please feel free to reach out. And this is one of the first of many stories that I look forward to sharing. And may this be a spell casted for you, Joshua, too, for this new podcast series that I know is a dream and scheme of yours. So we're all here in the belief of that and can't wait to see you featured in that magazine that they said.
Perfect.
Yeah, appreciate you and love you beyond. And if you want to, in a brief whisper of a prayer, close us out, that would be wonderful.
I like to say all blessings, all honor, all glory to the source and form of that which we come from, the one beloved who lives in all of us and is here for all of us. I'm grateful for this process, this time, and this space, and may the blessings be with all of it. We are here, we are present, and we are worthy, and we are loved.
Ah, oh,
Aho.
Ashe, amen. Thank you for that.
Amen.
It's so wonderful. Thank you, Joshua. And yeah, we will talk soon.